So this is in the annual plan of the new research agency, as well as the existing requirements that should be included in the plan: performance targets, reporting arrangements, the allocation of resources, and so on. I won't list it all that the government, the Minister has already included. We are proposing to include a requirement to specify the proposed allocation of total resources, both financial and persons, of the agency between particular academic disciplines, fields of research, or groupings thereof. And the purpose of this really is in line with the discussion that we had in the previous grouping, Minister, which is to try and ensure that we have that diversity of focus when it comes to what we are funding, what research we are funding, to have that diversity. So it doesn't all get skewed in particular directions that governments might want, or that industry or business might want. And I do think, Minister, that these are very legitimate concerns. I was just flicking through again the bill and noticing that in preparing the corporate plan, for example, in the previous, one of the earlier sections, there's a requirement to consult with the Minister, on Ross, Enterprise Ireland, the Industrial Development Agency, and such other bodies or persons as it considers appropriate. So again, just indicative of something I was saying earlier on, the certain things are specified. The IDA and Enterprise Ireland. They have to be specified. But not so with other disciplines, that they're not specified. Why the hierarchy? Why the hierarchy? So I think that's a very, very legitimate concern, that research becomes a slave of a particularly narrow sort of idea of economic economic success or efficiency, or benefiting some narrow notion of economy. And that has, when you think about it on the very, very big picture, that has worrying implications. When you look at the amount of money that goes into researching weapons, for example, enormous amounts, that could, if it wasn't going into weapons, could be developing cures for diseases, could be going into arts and the humanities, into children's theatre, as Deputy Farrell said, but somehow making money for arms companies sucks up a huge amount more of global research than it should, massively more than it should. And that's not completely alien in this country, as we're trying to dig up the connections between our higher level and university institutions and Israel and its arms industry. Stuff is being uncovered by our student boycott, divestment and sanctions groups of these connections that do exist between our third level institutions and a state that is currently, in my opinion, and the opinion of many people, committing genocide. And has a very developed arms industry and does its absolute best to develop connections with university and higher level institutions all over the world to further its military and political agenda, with horrific consequences for the Palestinian people. So, it's a legitimate concern to ensure that that sort of thing doesn't happen, and that our research priorities and what we fund do not become skewed in particular directions, but we have at least transparency, if you like, about what we are, how the agency is deploying its financial and human resources to ensure that sort of diversity and spread of research priorities, to ensure that it isn't being skewed in particular directions.
should have said it earlier. I want to thank the Bills Office for the huge amount of work they've done in preparing for tonight's session and the turnaround times. Can I just say, firstly, in relation to the ERC and the point Deputy Sherlock made, I take that seriously, and I'm very happy to engage with eminent people like Professor Luke O'Neill and others in the ERC who serve Ireland well, not just in Ireland but internationally. I'm very happy to do that on foot of this conversation. I'm also very happy to take up the point that you made, because I don't see myself or my department or the government or the Oireachtas as bystanders in relation to the conversation around terms and conditions, precarity in higher education. And I think my comments on the record, including at the IFUD conference in recent years, would show that. As we invest more as a people in higher education, we have every right, whilst respecting academic freedom 100% and autonomy of institutions, we have every right to want to know what that will achieve in terms of reducing precarious employment, decent full-time employment, terms and conditions, and very much that's the conversation my department and the HEA has on an active basis. I'd also say, when it comes to issues of deficits and the likes, I'd make the point that these houses passed the HEA Act relatively recently, which does give the HEA a really important role in working with institutions and getting to the bottom of issues, but also in working to make sure any implementation plan about how people restore themselves to financial stability is grounded in the principles and objectives that we as a state wish to see in terms of what we prioritise in education. And I very much continue to monitor that. I should just say, when Deputy Boyd Barrett listed the various agencies that have to be consulted, and he listed the IDA and listed Enterprise Ireland. He did also list initially on Tudor's the Higher Education Authority, the body that funds higher education institutions in Ireland. He did list me as in the current office holder, but those who come after me as well. So we've a slightly different maybe take on the wording of this, but I mean, I very much see this as an agency now that is based within an education and research department or under the remit of that, having to consult with a minister who comes at things from an education perspective and a research perspective, and also having to consult with the Higher Education Authority as well. But it is important that we continue to build on the links that SFI have established, the very excellent links with IDA Ireland, Enterprise Ireland, and that's served Ireland well, and I've seen that internationally, and I think we should need to continue to appreciate that. I'd also see this, and I go back to a point I made earlier very briefly, what we're doing here by putting arts and humanities on a statutory footing actually is going to open up programmes that perhaps they might have felt excluded from applying for in the past. So I actually see greater opportunities for arts and humanities, and some of the examples you give, to start applying for funding programmes. And I think that's the exciting opportunity genuinely here for arts and the humanities as well. Look, I would make the point, I see the logic in the amendment, but I do think the existing provision in the section is really a fairly standard requirement in legislation for an agency of this type relating to performance, resource allocation and the likes. I would point out the board composition matters. It'll be the board making these decisions. I've outlined the criteria in relation to board membership. And I would say to Deputy Sherlock's points, or the way he put it, there's already provision, quite rightly, for ensuring that the agency's planning does accord with guidelines and policies, because we're very proud of in this country that we don't have political interference in terms of who is awarded research funding. No one wants me deciding that or any of my successors. But it is right and proper that the Oireachtas and ministers and governments of the day can set priority areas in terms of how we want to see our citizens' investment made without getting into individual projects or individual funding decisions as well. So I believe the provision as already worded in the bill is in line with similar provision in comparable legislation. In addition, there's also provision in section 31, the accountability of the Chief Executive Officer to other Oireachtas committees, for the committee to request the Chief Executive to attend and to tease through these issues as well, and indeed for that person to give account for the general administration of the agency. So I do understand Laskin-Corley the intention of the amendment, but I do believe the existing provision already contains the capacity for the agency to be transparent and to be accountable in terms of upholding its policy intentions, and for these reasons I cannot accept the amendment.
Richard Boyd Barrett. After Sherlock.
Yeah. Just on Deputy Sherlock's point, I respectfully disagree on that this isn't the place. I wasn't aware of IFUD's representations. I was aware of the postgraduate workers' representations, but it's interesting that IFUD are making that representation, and it's in line with the earlier amendments, although I think it was more proper to the earlier grouping of amendments, that particular comment. But when you look at the other objectives of the agency, the idea that you wouldn't include the conditions of employment and the sort of well-being and the career opportunities of postgraduate researchers as part of the objects of the agency, to me, doesn't actually make sense, because it's quite wide-ranging what the objectives are, but surely the critical component in all of it are the human beings who actually do the research. So to me, that's just obvious, in a way, that that should be a priority for the agency, to look after the well-being and welfare of the researchers. But on the actual amendment itself, I mean, I think this is a very, very reasonable amendment, I have to say, Minister, because all it's actually asking is that as part of its annual report, it would specify the allocation of resources, financial and persons, of the agency between particular academic disciplines, fields of research, or groupings thereof. That should be just set out in its report, so that at a glance you can say, what have they been doing? And is there a good diversity of disciplines? So it's very, very reasonable. You know, whatever else you may say about the debates and differences, like, I mean, to me, that is an amendment you could accept, and it would benefit the report that would be produced every year by the agency. So you might consider accepting one amendment, Minister.
And Tara.
Look, I believe that the aim of what we want to achieve is already captured by the legislation. Is the point I'm making. The Chief Executive is already accountable. This agency will be under the remit of Freedom of Information Act, parliamentary questions, the Minister of the Day being accountable to the House. So I believe that that's already the case, but I also believe that the current provisions do adequately capture this. And I would again make the point, because it's an important point, the whole reason we're doing this, the whole reason we're establishing this agency, is to try and have one research funding agency in Ireland, and not have a sense that you have humanities over here and science and enterprise over here. And I actually think there's very exciting opportunities, genuinely, for arts and humanities researchers in terms of accessing funding streams that perhaps haven't been available in the past.
Would you want the last word, Deputy Boyd Barrett?
Well, I'm not opposing the legislation per se, so, you know, I certainly hope that is the case, Minister, and I want it to be the case, but there is things to be done, and you've decided not to include them in this legislation. I would have preferred if you did, but I hope you will keep your commitment to the researchers and to the people who engage in research to resolve the issues that are very real issues for them. It's not right that so many researchers are living in poverty and have such precarity in their lives, and where they often consider and do drop out because they just can't sustain this. You know, because they're not students. You know, just to put it, they're not students. There are people who are into their early adult or even past early adulthood who have lives, who've got families in case of partners, mortgages, rents, and so on. So they can't be treated as students. We should stop treating them as students. We should treat them properly and give them decent incomes and, you know, sustainable career paths. And I hope you will do that as a matter of urgency. As a matter of urgency, it's the right thing for them to acknowledge them, but it is also, Minister, the right thing for the country, for our society, for the advancement of science, research, the arts, humanities. At every level, it is the right thing to do. And I think we are still significantly behind the curve in doing it, and we need to do it quickly. I'd have preferred if you'd done it here, but we'll be on your case to make sure that you do it, Minister.